Hello and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. I'm your host, Hilmarie Hutchison, and today's guest brings an insightful and empowering voice to a topic that's often overlooked but deeply impactful. Joining me is Sara Beattie, a UAE-based positive psychology practitioner and menopause coach. Sara is the co-author of two powerful research studies, both focused on understanding and transforming the lived experience of menopause. With a background in teaching and a master's in applied positive psychology, Sara blends education, emotional well-being, and creativity in everything she does. I am so looking forward to this conversation. Sara, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the lovely introduction. It's great to be here.
So, Sara, let's begin with your story. Can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to the UAE?
Yes, so I was born and raised in England, and my mum's English, my dad's from New Zealand. So I always had a mixed culture background, and my mum had been a bit of a trailblazer and left the UK on a boat, travelled 6 weeks to New Zealand back in the 50s. And so there was always this element of other cultures, other places. The world's an amazing place to explore in my family and in my upbringing. And I ended up being one of those eternal expats living in Asia for 23 years, then went back to London for a little bit recently. And then my husband had an opportunity to work on COP28 here in Dubai. So we lived separately for a little bit. And at that point, I'll admit I was getting slightly itchy feet, and he had been offered a few opportunities over here. And so it was time to take them. The kids are all grown up doing amazing things and being amazing humans. And it was time for a change.
Amazing. Wow. So you had quite an interesting background. I love how your mom was such a fantastic role model for you. You said, the way you said, she was a trailblazer as well. So she was the one, the impetus, the driving force behind moving all over the place, which would have given you a much wider view of the world than somebody who hasn't traveled or lived in so many different places. You've lived and worked in countries across Asia and now in the UAE. How has your expat journey shaped your perspective on well-being and midlife challenges?
I've had the benefit of seeing and learning from a lot of different people and a lot of different cultures, and that everybody comes with a slightly different perspective on how to make somewhere feel home, particularly if it's not where you were born and raised, and how you look after yourself and also how you look after each other in a society where you may not have access to family in the same way.
Yes, so you've seen it from different perspectives.
Absolutely. And I think it's been very helpful to kind of have that in mind, particularly coming up to that midlife change, as you say, because women often don't have the same support systems in place that they might have if they were living at home.
Yes, absolutely. So how did you get into the coaching space?
So I was invited a few years ago to join. So at that time I was teaching. I've had a very long and happy career teaching, and I was doing lots of work to do with positive education and well-being for children. And that was spreading into wanting to introduce some ideas for staff well-being. And another colleague had just discovered coaching and said to me, "Oh, you should do a thing about coaching. You do this stuff all the time. You just don't know that you're doing it." And I was lucky enough to go on a short course and discovered coaching and what it is and how it works, and just went, wow, this is extraordinary. This really empowers people to just work through something that they're a little bit stuck on, to help them get unstuck, move from A to B, without it being this big heavy thing that sometimes, it serves that lovely spot that therapy is amazing if you really need to work on something deep-seated, and counselling's brilliant if you want to work on something that's sort of an immediate problem that you've got to sort out, the emotional problem. Whereas coaching looks at where you are and where you want to go and helps you figure out how to get there. Around the same time, I knew I wanted to do more with it. And I'd just done a little bit of research and found a master's course in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, which at the time I was living in Hong Kong and they were not doing anything online. So I had to wait for about 6 years till I got to London and finally had the chance to do it. And it happened to come 2020, and I started in January, so a couple of months before lockdown. And it was the most extraordinary experience to work on understanding more about that science of flourishing and living a good life from whatever your starting point, and the importance of understanding and experiencing the range of emotions that we as humans do. And alongside that, elements in this course were elements of coaching. And again, I just thought that was wonderful. It coincided with probably the most impactful of my own menopause symptoms. And in 2020, people weren't talking about it. I could only go to my doctor, who said, well, you've managed this far, surely you can sail on through at this point. I'm known in my family as doze because I can curl up and sleep anywhere. So for me not to be sleeping, I knew it was quite bad. That, of course, impacts every other aspect of your life. You know, I wasn't turning up at work in the way I should be. I wasn't, just not being myself. And did a little bit of my own research into what could be causing this, and discovered at that time there was one book, just one, from Louise Newson. I ended up buying a copy online, and I took it down to my doctors and I said, do you know this doctor? She's an NHS doctor. Do you know about her work? No, he said. I said, well, I'd like you to read this book and come, and I'll be back next week.
The patient giving the doctor homework to do. I love it.
Well, I was fortunate because I'd gone expecting to speak to the same doctor who'd said to me, sail on through. But actually, it was a locum, and it was a young man in his 30s. He was very open and said, yes, I'll read this. But in the meantime, do you want some antidepressants? Like, no, I'm not depressed. That's not what this is. Anyway, I went back a week later and he said, yeah, I've read it. And actually, I've ordered a copy for the practice because I think we all need to read it. It was quite a moment, I have to say. And so through all of that combination of things, I got to the end of my master's, about to do my dissertation, and it was going to be something to do with coaching and education. And my supervisor said to me, hey, we've been talking about a few things. She said, you know, you can go back to the education stuff tomorrow. This is a one chance you're on this course and you could do it on anything. And it doesn't have to be to do with your normal everyday job. It just can be something that you really would like to do. And I said, well, then let's do something about menopause, because that's having a massive impact. And I know that people aren't talking about it. And I know that if I'm struggling, there's going to be a lot of other people who need some support in this. And that's how I came to do my dissertation, my first bit of research.
So you loved your teaching, you loved what you were doing, and yet that sort of naturally flowed into something that you found your passion in, being interested in well-being. And it's amazing how sometimes in life we can't decide ahead of time where life is going to take us. And in your case, I mean, yours is a perfect example of that, where you started in one way, in one career, and that sort of then moved you into something quite different in the end. It's still a caring and teaching type of situation, but in a totally sort of different field, one from being an educator and one about helping people through a very difficult time. And as you mentioned, it coincided with your own journey. So your own need was there that also then inspired you to do the research down that same path, where you could see that people were not talking about something that affects half the population sometime in their lives. So it is an important topic to be talking about. And I love how you used COVID 2020, that period when people were in lockdown, to go through your master's, if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, that's right. So I was doing my master's. I was still working, so I had to teach online every day, my lovely class. But it gave me space and time at home to look at that study stuff. So it was very fortuitous timing, I think.
You took on such a big thing. As you said, you were heading into menopause, so you're not in your 20s, clearly, and yet you decided to take on a master's at this age. So it's also, I think it's an excellent example for all of us. We never pass the time where we can learn or change direction in our careers.
Absolutely. That's something else I have to credit my parents for. So my father unfortunately passed away. He was only 67. But when we were going through his things, he was studying for a maths exam because he just wanted to prove he could do it. Just that understanding from both of them, you know, you're never too old to learn anything.
Your mom was a fantastic role model here, and your dad was as well. I mean, at 67, still studying, trying to get some more education. Absolutely fantastic. And this is great for all parents. For all of those listening to this podcast, as parents, we can set that example of wanting to learn and never thinking we're beyond learning something new. Excellent. I love that you've shared that with us. Now let's talk about some of your research. Firstly, your research project, From Isolation to Agency, has been widely recognized. What were some of the key findings that stood out to you from that study?
So a couple of things. When you start a bit of research, you have to do a literature review, which means you have to read all the papers and all the studies and try and find out what everybody already knows so that you have a starting point. There wasn't anything. There was stuff about hot flushes. There was stuff about body changes and night sweats and lots of the very physical symptoms. But there was nothing about the more emotional or psychological impacts that menopause can have. And I noticed that when I had started talking to a couple of friends, there were a couple sort of in denial, lots of people, I'm scared of this, it sounds awful. And I wanted to look into that. So I ended up, because there was no springboard for me, I had a wide scope. And I ended up looking at self-compassion in perimenopausal women experiencing brain fog. Brain fog was, and still bugs me to this day, was probably my trickiest symptom. What was extraordinary was I had the gift of working with women in 5 different time zones, all sharing their experience. And so I was a lady in Italy and Germany and Abu Dhabi and Hong Kong and Australia. Although their individual paths were a little bit different, their journey was the same. And they'd felt completely isolated. They didn't know what was going on. They knew they weren't themselves, but they didn't know what to do about it. So there was a surprising number of these women who had been to ask for help, whether it was their family, their friends, or a doctor, and then had been almost brushed away. And that led to very strong feelings of isolation. In fact, one of my ladies said, I feel like a nomad on an island in my own home, which has stuck with me all this time. A lady who's got a very close sibling, and she said, my sister said, no, I don't want to talk about it. And a lady, as I said, in complete denial, I don't want this to happen to me. So we worked with a series of self-compassion exercises. And we also spent time together just talking, whatever's come up for you this week. And the power of a group of wise women in a room cannot be underestimated. The value of being heard and seen and just sharing in a space where people are saying, oh my God, I thought I had Alzheimer's. Or, oh, is this what it is? I didn't realize it was more than my period stopping and having a few hot flushes, because that's what I was told at school. We weren't educated in this. And a woman put it brilliantly. She said, well, where's the village? When you're in puberty or you're pregnant, everybody wants to talk about it and everybody wants to give you advice, whether you want it or not. What happens? Where's the village at this point in life when you need just as much support, just as much understanding from other people? And it's just not there.
As you also said, there's not much information. And also the information that is out there, there's a lot of controversy around the types of the way to deal with it. There's a lot of controversy and confusion around the way to deal with the symptoms of menopause. So you almost don't know who to listen to, who to believe, which direction, which medication. And what I loved about the research you did is you've taken women from so many different time zones, as you'd mentioned, different backgrounds, but all on the same journey and all experiencing a lot of the same issues, some of the same feelings of isolations, of really not knowing. Also mentioned people don't want to talk about it. They almost feel like we'll shove it under or sweep it under the rug and then nothing will happen. It doesn't take away what's happening to women and to their bodies during this period.
Absolutely. I think you've really captured that. And I remember talking to a friend and she said, well, the thing is, you don't go and have a drink or coffee or go to the pub or whatever it is, and you don't hear people chatting in that way. And it's not necessarily something our mothers talked about. And so if our mothers weren't talking about it, then there's probably, maybe we shouldn't. And for some people, there's this associated just fear, or for some people, a bit of shame. My family doesn't talk about this. And that's where it's important that there are spaces and places and people that women can talk to. And you're so right about the not knowing who to listen to. It's funny, when I was doing my original bit of research, this was 2021, my husband said to me at the time, as soon as companies realise that if they put the word menopause on, there's women in their 40s, 50s who've got money to spend, you will see it everywhere. And he couldn't have been more right.
Yeah, so people are actually, or companies are actually taking advantage of women because there's actually no, as you mentioned, there's no real research, there's no real information. So you can just offer, promise, talk about things and sell things without that actually has no benefit to people just because not enough information out there about it. But as women who have been so successful, they've had a career, they've done so much in their lives, to get to this point in their lives, and then there's big gap of knowledge where there's all this confusion happening, all these changes happening, and there's not much research, not much information to help people. It's a really sad state of affairs.
Yeah, I agree. And women just need a bit of clarity. And I think you can support that and suggest that women just tune into themselves a little bit and maybe keep track of what's going on and what is usual or normal for them, so that when things start changing, then they're aware. It's like, oh, actually, I've started having a headache every month. Or that's funny, I'm forgetting a few things and I know I'm busy and I've got this thing on at work, and yes, I've got my aging parents to worry about, or, maybe my teens or whatever it is. I think that's also one of the tricky things about perimenopause and menopause, is that it comes at a time when you are naturally busy in your life. Not that there's ever a time that you're not busy, but it seems to be. It's like a sandwich stage. There you are in the middle, and above you, you've got aging parents or parents who live in a different country that you might be worrying about. You may have children, or you may have, kids away at university or something else to worry about. And it's like you're the sandwich filling in the middle. And so you tend to stretch yourself to worry about other people first.
Yes, I think that's quite natural for women to do that, to take on a lot on their shoulders. And as you say, you could put down your tiredness or your brain fog or all these other symptoms. You could be putting that down to, I'm just busy, I'm just stressed, there's just so much going on, without actually recognizing that there's actually a change happening for you. I love that you were guided to do your research into this, because as you said, at that time you could have done it about anything, done it about childhood education, focused on the teaching aspect, which there's a million studies about. So I absolutely love that you used this opportunity to look into the menopause period of a woman's life. I'm grateful that you went down that path rather than the other. Let's just focus a little bit and talk about the Age of Renewal project. How did this project come about, and what makes it different from other menopause research efforts?
In my first bit of research, as I mentioned, we've got lots of women who were experiencing isolation and confusion. And then once they'd had an opportunity to reflect with a little bit of self-compassion and come together in a group, that was empowering. So I knew that there was power in getting women together and giving them opportunities to share. In my work with individuals and groups since, I noticed that women often weren't quite sure of the words to find to express what's going on. And sometimes that's because they're whether they're feeling a little bit confused, they don't actually know what's happening, and so it's hard to describe. Or maybe for some women, it's denial again, or a little bit of shame. And so the ability to find the words to express what's going on wasn't always easy. Some women are quite happy to sit down and really talk about it, and some women really struggle.
Could it also be just a lack of education around the topic of menopause?
Yeah, that's such an important thing to bring up. I mean, most women my age, like I said before, you have the one lesson. In fact, I can clearly remember it because it's the same day we have the condom lesson. So nobody's going to think about the menopause sentence because you're teenagers and you're too busy thinking about the other end of it. We were just told that, you get to about 50, your periods will start and you'll get hot flushes. Well, you don't know what hot flushes are, but you're teenagers and awkward, so nobody's going to ask. Don't get told about any of the other things. But yes, the education piece is so important. So when I shifted from teaching to coaching, because I'd loved teaching, I didn't quite want to drop it entirely. And so I thought I'd bring with it some of the things I loved. And some of the things I loved were getting kids to think about things in different and creative ways. So rather than write about something, we might build a model, or we might go into the woods and find a stick and 3 leaves and show me a particular concept using things in nature, or, what color is Tuesday, and things like that. And I wanted to bring that fun element into my coaching, because I believe very strongly that when we are able to think creatively, not artistically, but creatively, we can bypass the need for language and think about things in a different way. And so in my work, if people are interested, they can work with me just talking, or they can choose to bring in Lego or collage, do some lovely work through collage, or we might just use the objects on your desk. And so I've noticed when we do things like that, it just gives people a different way to think about something. And they start thinking about on a deeper level. It just bypasses that need for vocabulary.
I love how you've taken some of your aspects of teaching, the way we teach children, bringing a fun element, and as you say, making it creative so that you don't need to have, there's no need for words, but you can still express the menopause experience through these creative mediums like art, poetry. You mentioned collage. I love that you've taken such a different approach to a topic that's really difficult sometimes to understand, sometimes difficult to express the feelings or what one is going through. So I absolutely love that. You describe menopause as a time of renewal. Can you talk about how that reframe is helping women embrace this stage of life?
Yes, what a lovely question. The age of renewal, I discovered when I got here to Dubai, actually. My understanding is that it's a rebrand from the age of despair, which is what menopause had previously been known as in the region. There was a marketing campaign, I think with Tenor, who were trying to suggest that maybe that wasn't the best way to phrase menopause. And I think they did a public survey and it ended up coming out as being the age of renewal. And I love that because that's exactly what it is. As women go through this phase, it's a chance to reflect and to reconnect with parts of themselves that they may have forgotten, but maybe deprioritized. So I'll often be working with women who will say, well, when I was 20, I really wanted to write a book. Or I used to sing in a choir, but I don't really have time anymore. Or I used to love painting or whatever it is. And it's this lovely time to sort of reset, recalibrate, if you like, where you are, who you are, and who you want to be, and what is still important to you, and what you maybe want to readjust and let go of, or reignite those lovely things that used to bring you joy.
That's a lovely way to describe it. Time and opportunity. I love how you said it's an opportunity to recalibrate who you are.
No, it's all right. And I was just going to say, so part of when I'm working with women, whether it's groups or individuals, there is this reflection. So as well as an understanding of what's going on, there's this reflection time that's just for you. And that's often quite hard to find when you're busy. So that in itself is a little gift. And then we do take time to think about those opportunities. Well, yeah, what do you want this next bit of your life to look like? And how are we going to make that happen?
I think just to also that awareness that this is a change and there is something that you can do to make a positive experience. I love how you say that the rebranding of the term from an age of despair, which is such a negative, it's an awful term to have, to the age of renewal, which gives something so positive, something almost to look forward to. I love that whole change of mindset about the topic of menopause. What are some common misconceptions about menopause that you're trying to change through your work?
That it's all doom and gloom. So there's been a real increase in some circles of people talking about menopause. The fact that you and I are talking about it now, this wouldn't have happened a few years ago, right? And I think that's a really positive thing. But it's like a pendulum swing. And it's very much in these terrible, uncomfortable things are going to happen. And that's not necessarily the case for everybody. The symptoms that women experience are individualized. I mean, there might be some overlap. You're definitely on your own path with it. And there's ways to manage that. So that's one of the things. Excuse me. And the other thing I think that really needs to happen is it's back to the point that you were making earlier, is about education for everybody. This isn't just a women's problem. So A, it's not a problem. It's just part of growing. And B, impact everybody. Women are going to experience it, but men have mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, colleagues, it's going to impact everybody. So it should be known about, it should be understood, and it should be allowed for. The problem with that is that then the pendulum swings a little far the other way, in that there's a danger of overcooking it and suggesting then that women who are already, a little on the back foot when it comes to workplace or maybe, depending on their sector, they become just a little bit in the difficult box because they might have children, they might take time off for childcare, and now you're telling me that they might need time off again when they're in their 40s and 50s. So I think we need to be very cautious around the global understanding of this.
It's a very interesting consideration, something I actually hadn't thought about, but it does make sense because you can almost paint it in talking about it by bringing it to the forefront. People might actually become more aware and only see the negative. So in the communication, in the awareness, it needs to be more of there's a solution. And by talking about it, by dealing with it, by educating ourselves, it actually is a positive thing. It's not a negative thing because it can so easily go the wrong direction. Everyone's talking about it, but it's only highlighting the negative, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And that brings it back to that piece I've just done, that age of renewal. So women were invited to share in whatever way was making sense. So some women wrote poetry, we had nail art, we had collage, some amazing ceramics and some extraordinary painted portraits and a lot of poetry. And some women spoke or just, brain dumped. And what came through very strongly was that, yes, at times this had been tricky, partly because I didn't know what was going on and I hadn't been educated about this, and partly because the support systems weren't quite right. But this change through this journey to one of hope and, well, it was renewal, so I'll use that word again, was overwhelmingly shone through. So yes, there's what comes through as you learn more and you understand more about what's going on is that message that you're coming into your age of wisdom and sovereignty and owning yourself and who you are in a way that you haven't done before.
I love that also, as we mentioned earlier, this period of the journey is not negative. Don't see it as negative. See it as a positive, as you mentioned about the reframing around the terminology. See it as an opportunity to relook at things and make maybe different choices, even now. It's not too late, but I think that positive conversation around this period of a woman's life is so important and so impactful because in the past, no one spoke about it. And so, as you mentioned, a woman felt lonely, felt cut off, felt isolated. And just making it possible for women to talk and be recognized in this space will make all the difference to their journey.
Yeah, I totally agree.
You recently presented at the International Positive Psychology Association World Congress in Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I did. So I took that piece, The Age of Renewal, that I was just mentioning, that arts-based piece. We had 1,000 delegates from 60 countries, and it's researchers sharing what they're discovering about well-being, whether that's on an individual, group, cultural or societal level. And there were some extraordinary things being talked about. And I presented The Age of Renewal with a colleague, Janny Stricker, and she and I had received these wonderful images of artwork or poetry or words from people. And because most or a majority of submissions had been in poetry, I decided to actually present it as a poem. We did our analysis on the work we'd received and then took different elements and wove it together as a poem. It was well received. In fact, a lady, she stood up at the end and she said, "I've never wanted to give a standing ovation at a conference before."
Wow, what an amazing experience.
It was lovely. But it was a very wonderful opportunity to share work about menopause. And I have to say, I was quite disappointed, I guess is the word. Well, surprised, but disappointed that, there were dozens of speakers and several student posters, current research, and yet we were the only people talking about menopause. And that really quite surprised me, actually, just at this point where the conversation has really started and there's lots of people talking about it. I guess it's lots of people are talking about it if you know they're talking about it.
Yeah, but it also shows you that there's definitely still a need for people like you and others to make more noise, to bring more awareness, because so much of the focus is oftentimes, I wasn't at this Congress, but so much of the focus is often on young children or adolescents and their development. And there's not that much talk about women in the menopause phase of their lives. It's amazing that you were able to make a presentation about your findings, and I love how you say that you presented it in the form of a poem, which is absolutely fantastic. Let's change direction a little bit. What has surprised you the most about working with women on their midlife journey?
The positive change that comes. So I have some clients will come and they may have been through coaching before, and so they understand the process and what might happen, and they know that there's an expectation on them, come with a willingness to change. And they're brilliant because they jump straight in and tell you all the things and then figure out their plan. And then there's the ladies who come and who aren't quite sure. They just know that they're not themselves, something's off. And so they're sort of exploring the space, if you like. For those ladies who then go away with like a personalized action plan and feeling differently about life in whatever way it is that we've chosen to focus on, that's really lovely and really rewarding, but for them. And I think what's surprised me is that although I say I'm a menopause coach, women will often come in and, we've mapped out previously what it is they'd like to look at. And it might be about sleep because that's a big one. And then they'll come in and go, oh, I'm having a real trouble with this person at work. Can we just talk about that? I love the nature of everybody just bringing themselves, their whole selves, for whatever it is. And that's what we work on. And so it's surprised me that the scope of it has surprised me in a really positive way.
With so few people actually in this space talking about it, bringing awareness to it, I can imagine there must be a huge scope for women who want to do something about it and to talk to somebody who is going to help them to get the most positive experience out of this phase of their journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's been great about it is there's opportunities for women who just want to work on their own, and there's opportunities for women who are comfortable in a group situation and like to draw on the wisdom of a group. So I think it's been surprising that the women are interested in doing both and finding their own way in whatever way that suits them and working it out in a way that's going to make lasting change and positive change for them.
What advice would you give to women in their 40s and 50s who feel alone or uncertain as they enter this phase of life?
Keep track of what's going on, of what's normal for you, so that when you go to a doctor, your healthcare provider, you can say, hey, look, I'm usually X, but now I'm Y. And can we talk about why that might be? It is important to seek medical advice because just to make sure. So you don't need a blood test for menopause, which is one of those things that some people will tell you need. But if you think about fluctuations can be quite rapid, relatively rapid. And so if you think of a hot flush, it comes and it goes. And if you are taking a blood test and you take it at a time when your estrogen's high or low, that's what's going to show. And it may not be representative of your experience. So blood tests are often recommended but aren't necessary. So I would keep track of your symptoms and what's going on so you can talk about those. The other thing about medical advice, it's important because symptoms can overlap with other things. For example, long COVID has a lot of symptoms that are like perimenopause symptoms, and there can be thyroid issues and other things going on. So it's always worth double checking that that's what's actually going on. I'd also strongly say, do your own bit of research. There's some wonderful books now that didn't used to exist and some great websites that didn't used to exist where you can find out a lot of information that is accurate and is updated. Here in the region, there's some great supportive groups, Facebook groups. So there's MIMO, which is the Middle Eastern Menopause Organization, and there's the GCC Menopause Hub, and they've got lots of local information. And also don't wait to reach out and talk. Your mum will have been through this, and she's probably a good place to start. And if you don't feel you can talk to mum or a trusted friend, then reach out to groups or reach out to people like menopause coaches like me. We're here to help you. Don't wait.
I think those are excellent tips that you've shared. I mean, I know personally, my mom never spoke about menopause. I had to ask her, what age did you go through menopause? Because it's not something that was ever discussed. So I think there is such a need for making women understand that it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to talk about, and also your advice to start keeping a track of what feels normal so that you can start seeing when things are not feeling normal. I was surprised that when you said you don't necessarily need a blood test. because that would have been my first thing. Get a blood test so you know what your baseline is. But as you say, depends on the time of the day or the month or the week. It might show up different things, so it might not necessarily be the answer. But some really excellent advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now we've come to the segment of our show where I will ask you some rapid-fire questions, our version of a game show. Are you ready?
Okay.
Can you share a daily ritual that helps you stay grounded?
Oh, yes. I get out early every morning, try and be out around sunrise, and I walk as close to trees and nature and birdsong as possible.
You mentioned books earlier, so what is one book that you can highly recommend?
If it's a fiction book, I loved a book by Helene Wecker called The Golem and the Genie.
Okay, sounds good.
It's an expansive tale across cultures and time, and it was recommended to me by a friend, and it was just a brilliant piece of writing, and I loved it.
Super. One word that describes how you view menopause.
Renewal.
Not that surprising. What's next for the age of renewal?
So I'm developing a new one-to-one program, and I've got a group program coming up in September, and I'm really looking forward to doing round 2 of the art project and asking more people for submissions of their experiences and perceptions of menopause.
Excellent. Well, thank you for playing along. That was easy enough. Now, I would like to ask you our signature green pill question. What was your green pill moment, the action or event that was the turning point for you or your career?
So mine was, actually it was 2 events on the same day. And I'd gone to Iceland to present my first lot of research as a poster. And I was so nervous. So I'd gone from my school, they'd given me time off to go. Most of the research posters were very sciencey heavy and presented in a very typical science research poster way. Mine was like a movie poster, picture of a woman. And I did have some of the details of my study, but title, Isolation to Agency. A man came up, white hair, white beard, came up and a thick Austrian accent. And he said to me, "This is not a research poster." And I said, "Well, it is. Let me tell you about my research." And so I told him about the group of women I'd spoken to and the statistics around menopause and the impacts on women taking their lives or divorcing or leaving the workplace. And he said to me, "Wow, I'm a clinical psychiatrist and most of my patients are women in their 50s. And I didn't know anything about this." That really surprised me and made me think that, gosh, there's such a need for this information for everybody. And later that day, I stepped outside. It was the end of the conference and heading home to the UK and about to teaching and sort of put the menopause stuff to bed because I'd really enjoyed it, but, still teaching. My son Toby called me and he said, at this point, Toby was 25. And he said, "Mum, I've got a great opportunity for you. I've said yes for you. I've signed you up to do our lunch and learn on World Menopause Day." And he was working for sustainability in construction company, so nothing to do with teaching or anything that I might vaguely know about. But how awesome, personally, that my son is championing what I'm doing, but also that a man in his 20s understood the value of it and put it forward for his workplace was just mind-blowing. And those 2 things happening on the same day made me just think, you know what? I love what I do, but there's a need for this, and I'd like to do more of this.
Wow, that gave me chills. To have your son, like you say, in his 20s, recognizing what you are doing is so valuable and so important that he would recommend you and sign you up to his company to do the lunch and learn. Absolutely brilliant. And as you say, to take somebody who's in the field, the person that you met in Iceland, from that sort of almost negative comments to recognizing, wow, there's a gap that he himself wasn't filling. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing those experiences. And I can see how that would have then helped you make the decision to make a shift in your own life to really help women who need it, for sure.
Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your wisdom, and your heart with us today. Your work is certainly helping to shift the narrative on menopause from one of silence and stigma and confusion to one of creativity, empowerment, and renewal. I absolutely Love this conversation. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners learn more about your coaching, also about the research you're doing, and also to get involved with the Age of Renewal project?
Thank you as well so much for having me. It's been a really brilliant conversation. You can find out more on my website, Sara Beattie Coaching, also my Instagram or LinkedIn profile. So my Instagram, also Sara Beattie Coaching, and LinkedIn is Sara Beattie.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you for joining us for another inspiring episode of the Matrix Green Pill podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you, please follow, give us a 5-star rating, and share the podcast. And join us again next week for more stories of transformation and purpose. Until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.
If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.